The crack of a fist against marble. Then silence. Then the slow drip of blood on white silk. Vivien Calloway lay crumpled at the base of the grand staircase in the Ashworth mansion, 7 months pregnant. Her phone had landed 3 feet away, screen cracked, glowing with an unsent text message to her mother. "Mom, I need to tell you something about Carter. I am scared he is going to..." She never finished that sentence. Her husband, Carter Ashworth, Forbes 40 under 40, philanthropist of the year, the man who had wept openly at their wedding, straightened his tie. He stepped over her body. He walked to his home office and poured himself a bourbon. He waited 47 minutes to call 911, 47 minutes to construct his story, 47 minutes to practice the tremor in his voice, 47 minutes while his pregnant wife bled on imported marble and their daughter fought for her first breath in a womb that was no longer safe. She fell down the stairs. The pregnancy made her clumsy. "I found her like this. Please hurry. Please help my wife." Carter Ashworth believed 3 things with absolute certainty. He believed his money made him untouchable. He believed his connections would make this disappear. He believed that Vivien's quiet retired parents, a small-town librarian and a semi-retired contractor from a Vermont farmhouse, had absolutely no power to stop him. He was catastrophically wrong about all 3. Because Margaret Calloway was not just a librarian, and Robert Calloway was not just a contractor. Stay until the end. Because what these 2 ordinary-looking people did to one of the most powerful men in America will leave you breathless. And the lesson hidden inside this story might just save your life. Lesson and value. Before we begin, a message for every woman who has ever made herself smaller to keep the peace. Abuse does not start with fists. It starts with the first time someone makes you feel like your feelings are inconvenient. The first time you apologize for being upset. The first time you change yourself to avoid his mood. You are not too sensitive. You are not overreacting. You are a person who deserves to take up space. Now, let us tell Vivien's story. Call to action. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, I want to ask you for 3 small things. First, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We release stories like this every week. Stories that entertain, but that also leave you with something real. Second, drop a comment below. Tell me, have you ever known someone trapped in a situation like Vivien's? What would you tell her if you could reach her right now? Third, share this video. Send it to someone who needs it. Post it somewhere it might be found by someone who is quietly waiting for permission to believe that they deserve better. Your share might be the thing that changes everything for someone you will never know you helped.
The Boston Children's Hospital Charity Gala was exactly the kind of event where the food cost more to arrange than it contained in actual substance. Vivien Calloway, 31 years old, was standing near the far end of the appetizer table when her best friend Diane Fletcher leaned close and whispered with complete sincerity, "Honey, I have seen more food at a gas station funeral." Vivien laughed, a real laugh, warm and unguarded, the kind she would forget how to make in the years to come. She was wearing a dark green dress she had bought on sale and shoes that were slightly too tight. She was representing her nonprofit, the one she had built from scratch over 4 years, raising awareness for families experiencing domestic violence. She was happy, genuinely, uncomplicated happy. Then she felt it, eyes on her from across the room. Carter Ashworth stood 40 feet away, looking at her with an expression she had never seen directed at herself before. No interest exactly, something more focused than that. Like he had been looking for something specific and had just found it. He was beautiful in the way that certain men are beautiful when money and genetics align without effort. Dark hair, strong jaw, a tuxedo that had clearly been made for him specifically. He crossed the room without hesitation, without the circling uncertainty that most people brought to introductions, and he said the one thing she was not expecting. Your friend is right. These appetizers are a genuine crime against hospitality. I am Carter, and I would very much like to take you somewhere with actual food, if you will let me. Diane, standing 2 feet away, said nothing. But Vivien would later remember the particular quality of Diane's silence. Not approving silence, assessing silence. The courtship that followed was, by every external measure, a fairy tale. Private dinners at restaurants with month-long waiting lists. A weekend trip to Vermont because Vivien had mentioned once, casually, in passing, that she missed the fall foliage. She had grown up there. She had not expected him to remember. He remembered everything. He remembered that she took her coffee with oat milk and 1 sugar. He remembered the name of her college professor who had inspired her nonprofit work. He remembered that she was afraid of driving over bridges and never once suggested a route that crossed one. He texted constantly, warm, specific texts that made her feel seen rather than surveilled. Are you wearing comfortable shoes tonight? I know that venue has terrible floors. She told Diane everything in long phone calls that lasted past midnight. Diane listened. Diane asked questions. Diane said, "He sounds wonderful, Viv," and her tone said something that her words did not, and Vivien chose not to hear it. The engagement happened on a Tuesday evening in Vivien's apartment kitchen. She was wearing a paint-stained sweatshirt and eating cereal because she had forgotten to grocery shop. Carter showed up with takeout from her favorite Thai place and a ring that he had been carrying in his pocket for 3 weeks. I did not want to do it somewhere staged, he said. I wanted to do it when you looked like yourself. She said yes before he finished the sentence. She called Diane immediately. Diane said, "Finally. Now I have to find a dress that makes me look supportive, but not like I am trying to outshine the bride. This is a tremendous amount of pressure that you are putting on me." The wedding was held on a Saturday in October at a restored barn in the Connecticut countryside. Carter cried during his vows, real tears, or what appeared to be real tears, and everyone in attendance found it moving. Robert Calloway, Vivien's father, shook Carter's hand at the reception and said all the right things. Later, washing dishes in the farmhouse kitchen during the Thanksgiving that followed, he said quietly to Margaret, "I do not trust a man whose handshake is too perfect." Margaret dried a plate and said, "Robert, you said the same thing about our mailman in 2006. Robert said, "I stand by that assessment," but he let it go. Because Vivien was happy, because Carter was attentive and generous, and spoke about Vivien with what appeared to be genuine admiration, because Robert had trained himself for 30 years to trust evidence over instinct, and the evidence said his daughter had found a good man. The isolation began so slowly that Vivien did not recognize it as isolation. It began as concern. Your friend Diane made a few comments tonight that seemed a little cutting. I am sure she means well. I just wonder sometimes if she truly appreciates you the way you deserve. It began as generosity. You work so hard. You have built something wonderful with that nonprofit, but you do not have to do it anymore. Let me take care of us. Let yourself rest. It began as practicality. Your apartment lease is up anyway. It makes more sense for you to move into the house. We would save money, and we would actually see each other. It is the logical thing. One sentence at a time. One small agreement at a time. By their first anniversary, Vivien had stepped back from the nonprofit she had built. Her daily calls with Diane had become weekly, then occasional, then rare. Her apartment, her car, her bank account had all been absorbed into the architecture of Carter's world until she had nothing that was solely hers. She told herself this was what marriage looked like. She told herself she was lucky. She told herself that the occasional tightness in her chest when Carter came home in a particular mood was just anxiety, her own problem to manage, nothing to do with him. She was wrong about all of it, but she did not know that yet. Here is something worth remembering. For anyone who recognizes pieces of this story in their own life, love expands your world. Control shrinks it. In the beginning, these two things feel identical. Attention and surveillance wear the same face. Devotion and ownership use the same words. The difference is not visible in any single moment. The difference only becomes clear when you look at the pattern. When you notice that your world has gotten smaller, when you realize you cannot name the last time you laughed, the way you laughed at that charity gala, warm and unguarded and entirely yourself. Pay attention to the pattern, not the moment. 8 months into the marriage, Vivien attended a fundraiser for her old nonprofit. She had not told Carter about it in advance, not because she was hiding it, because she had mentioned it weeks ago when he seemed distracted, and she assumed he had absorbed the information, and it did not occur to her that she needed to remind him of her plans the way a child reminds a parent. She came home at 10:45 at night, glowing. They had raised $340,000. She was already composing in her head the message she would send to the team tomorrow. She was already thinking about whether she might go back part-time. The house was dark when she came in. Carter was sitting in the living room with no lights on. "Where were you?" It was not a question. She started to explain. The fundraiser, the families they were trying to help, the money they had raised, the fact that she had mentioned it weeks ago. The first hit was an open hand. She was on the kitchen floor before she understood what had happened. Her cheek burned. Her ear rang. The room tilted sideways in a way that did not make sense. Then Carter was beside her on the floor, sobbing, pulling her close. His voice was broken and desperate and full of a grief that seemed completely genuine. "I was terrified something happened to you. I called and you did not answer. I thought, I love you too much. I cannot control what happens to me when I think I have lost you. I am so sorry. This is my fault. I will never do this again. I swear to you, I will never do this again." She believed him. That is the terrible truth that she would carry for years afterward, until long after the believing stopped being possible. In that moment, on that kitchen floor, she believed him completely. She apologized for making him worry. She promised to always tell him where she was going. She accepted his tears as evidence of love, rather than what they actually were, a technique as old and practiced as the violence itself. The next morning, she called Diane. She got as far as Diane. "Something happened last night," and then she stopped. Carter had said, just that morning over coffee, voice gentle and concerned, "I worry about Diane sometimes. I do not think she always wants what is best for you." Vivien N. said, "Never mind. I am just tired. Tell me about your week." She hung up the phone and stood in the kitchen and looked out the window at the garden and felt, for the first time, the specific loneliness of being alone inside a marriage. The second incident happened 6 weeks later. The third happened 3 weeks after that. Each one was followed by tears and expensive gifts and promises that felt real enough to hold on to for just a little longer. Each calm period was shorter than the last. Each incident more severe. She learned to read his moods the way you learn to read the sky before a storm. The particular set of his jaw when work had gone badly. The quality of his silence when she said something that snagged on something invisible. She learned to become agreeable before he finished his sentences. She learned to make herself small and still and careful. She became an expert at performance. She smiled for cameras at his charity events. She charmed his colleagues at dinner parties. She gave the impression of a woman who was deeply content. And she hated herself for how good she had become at it. This is the moment in Vivien's story to say something directly to anyone who is listening and recognizing themselves. If someone has hurt you physically, even once, that is not a bad night. That is not a misunderstanding. That is not love expressing itself imperfectly. That is a pattern beginning. The window to leave is widest at the beginning. Please tell someone. Please do not hang up the phone. 2 years into the marriage, Vivien discovered she was pregnant. She sat in the bathroom of the Ashworth mansion for 40 minutes after reading the test, and she felt two things simultaneously that had no right to exist in the same body at the same time. Terror and fierce, overwhelming love for someone she had not yet met. She had stopped asking herself the question that had begun circling in her mind sometime around the fourth incident, the question that went, "How do I leave?" She had stopped because the answer felt impossible. Carter controlled the finances. Carter had relationships with every lawyer in the city worth hiring. Carter had a story ready for every situation, and the story always made her sound unstable, fragile, prone to dramatic interpretations of ordinary marital tension. But the pregnancy changed something. It gave her a reason that was larger than her own survival. She began, quietly, carefully, with the patience of someone who understood that rushing would be fatal to plan. She moved small amounts of cash. Grocery change, tips from errands, nothing large enough to notice. She hid the envelope inside her copy of Little Women on the bedroom shelf. She memorized the number for the state domestic violence hotline. She researched shelters in 3 different counties. She thought about timing, about documentation, about how to do this safely, and with her baby protected. She was 7 months pregnant when Carter came home to find her on the phone with Diane, the first real conversation they had shared in almost a year. Vivien was laughing. She heard the front door open and looked up and saw Carter standing in the doorway, and she saw his face, and the laugh stopped, and she said goodnight to Diane and hung up. "You called her." "Carter, I just wanted to—" The next 11 seconds unmade everything. Vivien was at the bottom of the staircase, and the world was dark at the edges, and the pain in her head was enormous and distant at the same time. The way pain is when the body is protecting itself from the full reality of what has happened. Her phone had landed 3 feet away. The screen was cracked. It was still showing the text she had been trying to compose before Carter came home. "Mom, I need to tell you something about Carter. I am scared he is going to—" She had not finished the sentence. Carter stood above her on the landing. His breathing was controlled. His face was not grief-stricken. Not yet. That would come later, for the cameras, for the paramedics, for the performance. In this moment, in the 30 seconds before he arranged his expression, he looked at his unconscious wife and his unborn child, and the blood beginning to spread across the marble, and his face held nothing that resembled remorse. He straightened his tie. He stepped over her. He poured himself a bourbon, and he waited 47 minutes to call 911. The paramedics arrived at 11:23. Jake Morrison was 28 years old and had been working emergency medical services for 5 years. He had seen car accidents and bar fights and the aftermath of falls down staircases, and he knew within 90 seconds that Vivien Calloway Ashworth had not fallen. Falls left specific injuries: broken wrists from catching yourself, trauma consistent with tumbling. Vivien's injuries told a different story. Defensive wounds on her forearms, knuckle-shaped bruises on her cheekbone, her orbital bone fractured from a direct blow, and beneath the fresh injuries, older bruises in yellow and green, injuries in various stages of healing. This woman had not been hurt tonight for the first time. Jake photographed everything before Carter's lawyers could arrive. Every bruise, every mark, every piece of evidence. Carter stood in the doorway of his study with his bourbon and watched. "Is that really necessary?" he asked. His voice had an edge beneath the practiced grief. "Standard procedure," Jake replied. He kept his voice neutral. He kept photographing. At the hospital, both Vivien and her daughter were fighting for their lives. The baby was delivered by emergency cesarean section at 1:12 in the morning. 3 pounds, 4 ounces. 31 weeks. A girl. She did not have a name yet. Vivien had been waiting to meet her first. The farmhouse in Montpelier, Vermont, had been Robert and Margaret Calloway's home for 22 years. It had wide plank floors and a porch that faced west and a kitchen that smelled permanently of coffee and whatever Margaret was reading. Because Margaret had a habit of reading cookbooks at the kitchen table and occasionally attempting what she found there. The phone rang at 11:47. Margaret answered on the second ring. She listened for 45 seconds. She said, "We are leaving now." She hung up. Robert was already standing in the bedroom doorway with his coat in his hand. He had heard her voice change. "How bad?" he asked. "Critical. Both of them." Robert nodded. He reached past his coat for a second phone, an older one, the kind without internet connectivity, kept in the drawer beneath his winter scarves. He dialed from memory. Margaret watched him speak quietly into that phone for approximately 90 seconds. She had been married to Robert Calloway for 38 years. She had seen him make calls on that phone exactly 3 times before tonight. The first time, Vivien was 19, and a man had been following her on the college campus for 6 weeks. The man relocated to another state within 10 days and was never heard from again. Margaret had never asked what Robert said on that call. She was not going to ask tonight either. They drove through the dark in a silence that had nothing to do with distance between them. Margaret made calls from the passenger seat. Her voice was calm and professional in the way that courtroom voices are calm, the calm of someone who has learned to keep their hands steady while everything they love is on fire. Robert drove at exactly 8 miles over the speed limit. Fast enough to matter, slow enough to avoid a stop. Carter Ashworth was in the private family waiting area when they arrived at 3:14 in the morning. He had arranged himself carefully, hair slightly disheveled, eyes red, shirt rumpled in a way that had taken effort to achieve. He rose when he saw them, and his face collapsed into an expression of relief and anguish that would have been convincing to anyone who had not spent 3 decades studying the architecture of performance. "Oh, thank God you are here. It has been... I cannot... She just fell, and I..." Robert sat down across from Carter Ashworth. He looked at the split skin on Carter's knuckles, covered by a bandage that had not existed in any photographs from the previous evening. He looked at the microscopic spatter of blood on Carter's collar. He looked at the particular stillness of Carter's eyes beneath the performed grief. Robert said nothing. He simply sat and watched Carter perform with the patient attention of a man who had spent a long time learning to wait. Beside him, Margaret let Carter take her hand, because grieving mothers accept comfort from anyone who offers it. Her other hand was hidden in her coat pocket, typing rapidly. Carter spoke for 20 minutes about stairs and accidents and pregnancy making Vivien clumsy, and how he had warned her to be careful, and how he had found her at the bottom and called immediately. Immediately, he had not hesitated for a single second. Robert noted every lie, every inconsistency, every rehearsed phrase that had the too smooth quality of something practiced rather than experienced. He said nothing. Revenge. Robert had learned in another life that he never discussed was most effective when the target did not know it was coming. Dr. Ellen Price, Vivien's obstetrician, asked to speak with Robert and Margaret privately at 4:47 in the morning. She closed the consultation room door and her professional neutrality came off like a coat she had been waiting to set down. "Your daughter did not fall," she said. Her voice was controlled and furious in equal measure. She was beaten. There are injuries in various stages of healing. Her orbital bone is fractured from a direct blow. 3 ribs broken, 2 of them older breaks that never healed correctly. Defensive wounds on both forearms. This has been happening for months, possibly longer. Margaret's face did not move. "Did you document everything? Every single mark?" "I have already contacted hospital administration and law enforcement. The paramedic who brought her in photographed the scene. This is not going to disappear into a file." Margaret looked at the doctor steadily. "Good. What does my daughter need right now?" "Surgery. There is swelling in her brain. The neurologist is working to relieve the pressure." Dr. Price hesitated. "I will not mislead you. It is serious. We do not know yet if she will wake up. We do not know what condition she will be in if she does." Margaret absorbed this. "And the baby? 3 pounds 4 ounces. She is in the neonatal intensive care unit. She is fighting." Margaret was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "Then we fight too. Day 6. Vivien was still in a coma, but the case was moving. Detective Patrick Walsh had been on the force for 24 years. He had worked domestic violence cases long enough to know that what happened to Vivien Ashworth was not a fall downstairs. He had the photographs, the medical records, the testimony from Jake Morrison, and a gut conviction that had never once led him wrong. He interviewed Carter Ashworth in a small room at the precinct on day 3. Carter performed grief for 40 minutes. He was exceptional at it. He mentioned the hospital wing his family had endowed 4 separate times. Then Walsh mentioned the pattern, the older injuries, the history. The other women his team had begun identifying through financial records that showed recurring payments to private attorneys specializing in non-disclosure agreements. Carter's mask slipped. "Do you have any idea who I am?" His voice had dropped the tremor, the practiced emotion. What remained was flat and cold. "My family has built 2 wings of this hospital. I employ 600 people in this city. You want to make an enemy of me over my wife's clumsiness. I want to make an enemy of you over attempted murder, Mr. Ashworth," Walsh replied. "Yes, that is exactly what I want." Carter was escorted out, and Walsh returned to his desk, feeling something he had not felt about a case in 3 years. Certainty. The district attorney's office began reviewing charges. Margaret's legal contacts were activated. Robert's other contacts were doing things that could not be discussed in official settings, but were moving the board in ways Carter could not yet see. Margaret called Robert from the hospital cafeteria on day 5. "Things are moving," she said. "Good," he said. "Now watch your back." She laughed. "Robert, I was a law librarian." There was a brief silence. "Margaret," he said carefully, "you were never just a law librarian." She did not respond to that, but she did not correct him either. The rug pull happened on day 7. Carter's legal team filed emergency motions that landed like a barrage. A temporary injunction limiting the Calloway family's hospital access, claims that Margaret and Robert were estranged relatives pursuing a financial agenda, documents questioning the legitimacy of the investigation. Carter gave a television interview on day 8. He wore a soft blue sweater. He held a photograph of Vivien from their wedding. His voice cracked at precisely the right moments. "I just want to be with my wife. I love her. I love our daughter. I cannot understand why her parents would use a family tragedy to pursue some kind of vendetta against me. I just want my family back." This interview was watched 4 million times within 48 hours. Social media erupted. A hashtag supporting Carter trended nationally. Opinion pieces appeared about grieving husbands being vilified and families weaponizing tragedy. A fundraising campaign for Carter's legal defense raised $90,000 in 3 days. The district attorney's office called and used the phrase more complex than initially presented. Detective Walsh was pulled from the case. Conflict of interest, the captain said. Walsh understood what that meant. He understood exactly whose phone call had generated that decision. He called Robert Calloway from his personal cell phone at 11 that night. Mr. Calloway, I am off the case. But I am not off the case. You understand what I mean. I understand perfectly, Robert said. Good, Walsh said. Because someone needs to. In the neonatal intensive care unit, the baby with no name slept in her incubator and breathed with the fierce concentration of someone who had decided she was going to make it, regardless of what the world outside had planned. Night nurse Carolyn Webb sat beside her and sang an old lullaby between monitor checks. Carolyn was 53 years old and had been working neonatal care for 25 years. She had seen babies smaller than this one fight their way into the world. Hold on, little one, she whispered between verses. Your mama needs you to hold on. Robert stood in the hospital parking garage on the lowest level in a concrete alcove that no security camera reached. His phone was receiving encrypted files from contacts whose names would not appear in any directory. Margaret found him there an hour later. You are doing something, she said. Yes. Is it legal? Robert considered the question. Some of it. Margaret was quiet. She looked at the concrete wall. She thought about 38 years of marriage and the things they had never needed to say directly. Robert, she said, I spent 22 years as a federal prosecutor, not a librarian. I have been a librarian for 12 years and I was very good at it. But before Vermont, I put away 4 men who believed their money made them untouchable. Robert waited. I retired because I was tired, she said, because someone threatened Vivien when she was in college, and we decided to become invisible. And it worked, and Vivien was safe, and I told myself it was enough. She looked at her husband. I am not tired anymore. Do whatever you have to do, Robert said. I intend to, she said. So do you. Let us stop pretending we do not both know what that means. They stood in the concrete alcove in the hospital parking garage and looked at each other across 38 years and understood, without another word, exactly what they were going to do. Day 11. Vivien's brain began to bleed. The alarm started at 2:47 in the morning. Nurses running. Doctors shouting orders in the compressed language of emergency. Robert and Margaret were in the waiting room when Dr. Price found them, and her face delivered the verdict before her words did. There is a complication. Bleeding in her brain that was not present before. We need to operate immediately. Margaret's knees buckled. It was the only time in Robert's memory that this had ever happened. He caught her, held her up, kept his own face still by the force of will he had spent 30 years developing. Do whatever you have to do, he said. Save our daughter. The surgery took 6 hours. Robert and Margaret sat in the hospital chapel without speaking. Neither of them prayed. Neither of them believed in that particular form of comfort. But the chapel was quiet, and the silence was the kind that could hold weight. Somewhere in the 4th hour, Margaret began to shake. Just her shoulders, just briefly, and then a sound that was not quite crying, but was something breaking loose from somewhere deep inside her. She was trying to leave him, Margaret said. She was trying, and we did not know. We did not help her. Robert held her. He did not say it would be okay, because he did not know if that was true. He simply held his wife and let her feel what she needed to feel. We will make it right, he said finally. Whatever happens, we will make it right. Day 12. The baby suffered a pulmonary setback at 4 in the morning. Her oxygen levels dropped sharply. An emergency team worked for 4 hours to stabilize her. Carolyn Webb stayed past the end of her shift, talking to the baby in a low, steady voice because she had come to believe in the past week that babies understood more than machines could measure. "Hold on," Carolyn said. "Your mama is fighting for you. You fight back." The baby's oxygen levels stabilized within the hour. The medical team called it a coincidence. Carolyn called it something else, but kept that to herself. Day 14. Carter's legal team filed for emergency conservatorship over Vivien. The motion argued that she was medically incapacitated and unable to manage her own affairs. If granted, Carter would have legal authority over all of Vivien's medical decisions, her finances, her legal representation, and her contact with the outside world. If Carter controlled Vivien's medical decisions, he controlled everything. Margaret read the motion at 7 in the morning in the hospital cafeteria with a cup of coffee that went cold while she was reading. She set down the document. She picked up her phone. She made 3 calls to former colleagues at the Department of Justice. She filed an opposition motion through an attorney she had worked with for 15 years. And then she made one more call to a judge who had presided over 3 of her most significant cases, a judge who had told her when she retired that she was owed a conversation she had never cashed. "Judge Patterson," she said when he answered, "I need to use my one." There was silence, then, "File everything you have to my clerk by morning. The motion will receive very careful review." The conservatorship was denied at 7 the following morning. Carter's attorney called him with the news. Carter picked up his phone and threw it through the floor-to-ceiling window of his study. His housekeeper, Evelyn Doyle, 67 years old, had worked for the Ashworth household for 19 years. She watched the phone sail past her ear, strike the window, and fall to the floor in a constellation of glass. She stood still for a moment. Then she picked up her coat, her purse, and her keys. "I'm going to need significantly more than 2 weeks' notice to process this," she said to no one in particular. She walked out the front door. She sat in her car in the driveway. She called the number for Detective Walsh that she had saved in her phone 3 weeks ago, the night she had watched Carter rehearse his story about the stairs in front of his bathroom mirror and thought, "I have to remember this." Walsh answered on the first ring. "Mrs. Doyle," he said, "I have been hoping you would call. I have 17 months of observations," she said, "and a very good memory. Come in tomorrow morning," he said. "I will have coffee waiting." Evelyn Doyle became, when the trial came, the prosecution's most devastating witness. She had seen everything. She had remembered everything. She had been waiting, with the patient determination of a woman who had spent 19 years cleaning up messes she had not made, for the moment someone would finally listen. Day 18, 6:14 in the morning. A flicker of consciousness. Sound arriving before sight. Beeping monitors. A voice saying her name. The soft mechanical rhythm of machines that had been keeping her alive. Vivien. The voice was warm, steady, female. Vivien opened her eyes, closed them against the light, opened them again. Carolyn was leaning over her with tears running freely down both cheeks, not attempting to stop them. "Can you hear me?" Vivien's throat was dry. Her lips cracked. The word came out as barely a sound. "Baby, she is okay. She is in the neonatal unit. She is a fighter, just like her mama." Vivien processed this. Both of them had made it. Both of them were alive. Then, "Where is Carter?" Carolyn's expression shifted. "He is not here. Do not let him near me." Vivien's voice was a thread, but the thread was iron. "Please do not let him near me. No one is going to hurt you anymore," Carolyn said. "I promise you." Margaret and Robert were called within the hour. They had been in the cafeteria reviewing the latest intelligence which was Robert's word for it, and Margaret had stopped correcting him 3 days ago. When they walked through the door and saw Vivien's eyes open, Margaret crossed the room in 3 steps. She held her daughter's face in both hands and looked at her, the way you look at someone you believed you might never see again. "You are here," she said. "Mom!" Vivien's voice broke. "I was trying to leave him. I had money saved. I had a plan. I was so close. I was almost ready." "I know." Margaret's voice was steady even though her hands were not. "And you are still going to leave him. You are going to leave him, and you are going to be free, and he is going to spend the rest of his life paying for what he did to you." Vivien looked at her mother. Something in Margaret's voice was different, not softer, harder. A promise wrapped in something denser than words. "Mom, what are you doing?" "What we should have done years ago." Margaret held her daughter's gaze. "Protecting our daughter." False victory arrived on day 20. Detective Walsh had rebuilt the case from outside official channels, working off duty with the tenacity of a man who had decided that certain wrongs could not be permitted to stand regardless of what his captain said. The evidence was compelling. Medical documentation, financial records showing NDAs, testimony from Evelyn Doyle that was so precise and detailed it had made Walsh's junior detective cry at her desk. For a brief golden window of time, it looked like it was going to be enough. Then Carter's team released Vivien's private therapy records to 3 media outlets simultaneously. The documents had been illegally obtained. That would matter later. Right now, the headlines were already running. Troubled past. Did Ashworth wife's history complicate their marriage? Sources close to the family say Vivien Ashworth struggled with instability throughout the marriage. Vivien read the headlines on a tablet that Carolyn brought her. She was silent for a long time. Then she said, "Get me something to write with. I am going to write my victim impact statement right now while I still feel this angry." Carolyn handed her a notepad and a pen without a word. This is something worth naming directly. For anyone who has been through something similar, what Carter did with those therapy records has a name. It is called DARVO, deny, attack, reverse. Victim and offender. When abusers run out of legitimate defenses, they use your history against you. Your vulnerability becomes their weapon. Your pain becomes their alibi. If this has happened to you, hear this clearly. It is not evidence of your guilt. It is evidence that they have run out of legitimate defenses. It means you are winning, even when it does not feel that way. Margaret, meanwhile, had been on the phone for 6 hours. She contacted 3 women through her network at the Department of Justice. 3 women from Carter's past. 3 women who had signed non-disclosure agreements and received payments and disappeared from public life. Each of them, when Margaret explained who she was and what she had been before Vermont and what she needed, said a version of the same thing. "I have been waiting for someone to call." Robert, simultaneously, was doing things in the parking garage with his older phone that would never appear in any official account, but were moving pieces on a board that Carter did not yet know existed. The Washington Post received a package on a Thursday from an anonymous source containing documentation of a pattern of behavior spanning 14 years, 3 previous relationships, 2 non-disclosure agreements, with specific dollar amounts attached, and a timeline that made the Vivien situation look less like an isolated incident and more like the logical conclusion of something that had been building for over a decade. The reporter assigned to the story called her editor at midnight. "This is going to be significant," she said. "How significant?" her editor asked. "Front page significant," she said. Above the fold, the Washington Post headline dropped on a Tuesday morning. "Pattern of violence, Four women detail allegations against CEO Carter Ashworth. The article was one of the most meticulously sourced pieces of investigative journalism the paper had published in 3 years. Every allegation verified, every source protected, every legal exposure pre-cleared. Carter's public relations team released a statement by noon. It used the word devastated 4 times and the phrase deeply concerned for Vivien's recovery twice. It described the allegations as fabrications orchestrated by individuals with financial motives. Nobody believed it. Within 48 hours, Carter's CFO and oldest friend, Gregory Holt, was indicted on federal wire fraud charges. The evidence had been assembled quietly over 3 weeks and was, by every legal standard, airtight. Offshore accounts, falsified regulatory filings, payments to witnesses disguised as consulting fees over a period of 15 years. Gregory Holt was 51 years old. He had attended Carter's wedding. He had played golf with Carter's father. He had known what Carter was for 2 decades and had made the calculation repeatedly that loyalty was more profitable than conscience. He maintained that calculation for approximately 8 hours after his arrest. Then he called the prosecutor's office and said, "I would like to discuss cooperation." He provided Carter's text messages, years of them, casual, damning, written with the confidence of a man who had never believed consequences applied to him. "She is getting ideas. Talk to Fenwick. Handle it. The Mercer woman is a problem. Find out who she was before Vermont." He had been trying to investigate Margaret. His investigator had found retired law librarian, Montpelier, Vermont. No prior legal career on record. He had stopped looking. He should not have stopped looking. Robert read that text message 3 weeks later in the kitchen of the farmhouse and laughed for the first time since the night they had driven through the dark to the hospital. It was a short laugh, and Margaret looked at him, and he showed her the message. "He thought you were a librarian," Robert said. "I was a librarian," Margaret said. "Margaret!" Robert's voice was carefully neutral. "Robert," she looked at him. "I was a librarian for 12 years. I was also a librarian before that. Just a different kind." They looked at each other. "He never had a chance," Robert said. "No," Margaret agreed. "He really did not." Carter's father, Douglas Ashworth, suffered a stroke on day 22. He was 75 years old and had been in declining health for 2 years, a fact Carter had mentioned publicly several times to generate sympathy about the stress he was under. Douglas Ashworth died on day 26. In his final hours, confused and heavily medicated, he made a confession to his attending nurse. A rambling, fragmented account of his marriage, his wife, the things he had done to keep her in line, as he put it, and the lessons he had taught Carter about how to handle a woman who forgot her place. The nurse recorded everything on her personal phone. She called Detective Walsh an hour after Douglas Ashworth's heart stopped. He confessed, she said, to what he did and to teaching his son. Walsh listened to the recording. Then he listened to it again. Then he added it to the evidence file that had been growing for 4 weeks and was now large enough to fill 2 banker's boxes. Exhibit 47, he labeled it. The board of Ashworth Capital Group called an emergency meeting on a Friday afternoon. Carter sat at the head of the table for the last time, surrounded by men he had known since boarding school. Men who had attended his wedding. Men who had tolerated the whispers for years because the profit margins made the whispers easy to ignore. The board chairman was 71 years old and had known Douglas Ashworth since before Carter was born. He looked at Carter with the expression of someone who has made a decision that is overdue. "It is over, Carter," he said. "The company cannot survive this. Our stock has dropped 43% in 3 weeks. Our institutional partners are withdrawing. Our credit lines are under review. You are facing criminal charges. Your CFO is cooperating with federal prosecutors. There is nothing left to protect. Carter looked around the room, at the men who had looked away for years, at the men who were abandoning him, now not because of what he had done, but because of what it was costing them. "This is temporary," Carter said. "When the dust settles..." "The dust is not going to settle." A second board member laid a document on the table. "Sign the resignation. If you refuse, we remove you by vote before end of business today." "This is not a negotiation," Carter signed. His hand was shaking so severely that the signature was almost unrecognizable. He walked out of the boardroom and into a hallway that felt 50 feet longer than it had an hour ago, and he understood, for the first time, that the world he had built was not going to survive what was coming. He did the stupidest thing he could have done. He went to the hospital. Robert was in the lobby when Carter walked through the doors. Carter was unshaven. His eyes were red. He was wearing clothes that had been slept in, and he had the look of a man who had lost his grip on the story he had been telling himself. "I want to see my wife," Carter said. "I have rights." Robert stood between Carter and the elevators. He did not raise his voice. He did not make threat. He simply looked at his son-in-law with the calm assessment of someone who had spent 30 years in rooms where real danger lived and had learned to recognize the difference between a threat and a performance. "You should leave," Robert said. "She is still my wife." Robert looked at him steadily. "Your daughter's name is Grace Margaret Calloway," Robert said. "She will never know you existed. She will grow up loved and safe, surrounded by people who would do anything before allowing someone to hurt her. That is the world you chose not to be part of when you stepped over my daughter on that marble floor and poured yourself a drink." Carter's face twisted. "You think you have won. You think your spy games." Robert stepped closer. "I spent 30 years in service to this country in a capacity that does not appear on any resume and is not discussed in any public record. I am retired. But the people I worked with are not. And the favors owed to me have been called in, one by one, over the past 4 weeks. I want you to understand what that means." Carter went very still. "I am not going to hurt you," Robert said. "That would be too simple. Instead, I am going to watch while everything you built burns down around you. I am going to watch you convicted and sentenced and led away in handcuffs. And then I am going to go home to Vermont and sit on my porch and watch my daughter raise her child in peace, knowing that you have no power over either of them ever again." He stepped back. "So please, Carter, keep fighting. Every additional charge makes the ending more complete." Carter stared at the quiet man in the cardigan sweater with the reading glasses and the steady hands. He left without another word. He never came back. The trial of Carter James Ashworth began on a Monday in October and lasted 11 days. The courthouse was old and grand in the way that institutions build to suggest success, that justice is serious business. Marble floors, high ceilings, the weight of accumulated decisions pressing down on everyone who entered. Vivien walked through the front doors with her mother on one side and Detective Walsh on the other. She wore a simple navy dress. No jewelry except a thin silver bracelet that Grace had grabbed onto the first time Vivien held her in the neonatal unit. Vivien had not taken it off since. She was terrified. She had been dreading this room for months. The moment when she would have to tell her story to strangers and trust that the truth would be enough. The moment when she would have to sit 20 feet from Carter Ashworth and speak the words that he had spent 3 years convincing her no one would believe. But beneath the terror was something that had been growing since she woke up in the hospital bed 18 days after he nearly killed her. Resolve. The courtroom was full. Journalists in the gallery, advocates who had followed the case, Women who had driven hours to be present for a verdict they needed to see with their own eyes. Carter sat at the defense table with his legal team. He looked different, thinner, the polish worn away to something more desperate underneath. When Vivien entered, he turned to watch her. She did not look at him. She did not give him that. She walked to the witness stand with her head level and her shoulders back, and she sat down. The lead prosecutor stood up. Her name was Diane Fletcher. She was 34 years old. She had a law degree from Georgetown and 7 years of experience prosecuting domestic violence cases. She had been Vivien's best friend since their freshman year of college, and she had driven to Margaret's farmhouse the night Margaret called and said, "I need the best person I know for this." Diane had said, "Tell me when and where. I will be there." When Diane was announced as lead prosecutor, Carter leaned to his attorney and whispered, "Who is she?" His attorney checked his notes. Vivien's best friend from college. Carter went pale. The one who made comments about the appetizers? Yes, Carter closed his eyes. "Oh," he said quietly. "Oh no. Mrs. Mercer," Diane began, "please tell the court about your marriage to Carter Ashworth." Vivien told her story. She started at the beginning, the charity gala, the charm offensive, the way he had made her feel chosen and seen in a way she had never experienced before. She talked about the isolation, how slow it was, how it had looked exactly like love until she was already inside it. She talked about the first night in the kitchen, the floor, the way she had apologized to the man who had just hit her because he was crying, and she believed his tears. She talked about the escalation, the broken ribs that were explained away, the bruises hidden under careful makeup, the charity events where she smiled for photographs while her body carried the evidence of what happened behind closed doors. She talked about the night of the staircase, the text she never finished, the 47 minutes. She spoke for 3 days. Her voice cracked twice. She did not stop. She looked at the jury when she said, "He told me no one would ever believe me. He told me I was nothing without him. He told me I was lucky that someone like him had chosen someone like me." She paused. He was wrong about every single thing. The evidence presented in those 11 days was overwhelming in both its volume and its specificity. Medical records documenting a pattern of injuries across 2 years. Financial records showing 9 payments to 7 women totaling $4.3 million in non-disclosure agreements. Testimony from Evelyn Doyle, who described 17 months of observations with the precision of a woman who had understood, long before anyone official did, that she was witnessing something that needed to be documented. Gregory Holt testified for 2 days. He described 20 years of covering for Carter. The payments, the witness management, the judicial relationships that Carter referred to as investments. He also read Carter's text messages into the record. "She is getting ideas. Handle it." The jury listened. Dr. Ellen Price testified about the injuries she had documented, about the pattern of accidents that were not accidents, about the moment Vivien's broken body arrived in her emergency room and she understood everything she had suspected and been unable to prove. Jake Morrison testified about the photographs he had taken before anyone could stop him. And then the prosecutor played Douglas Ashworth's deathbed recording. "I taught him everything. How to handle women, how to keep them in line." The courtroom was silent enough to hear the ventilation system. Carter's defense team tried everything available to them. Character attacks on Vivien, expert witnesses who suggested alternative interpretations of the medical evidence, allegations that the Calloway family had orchestrated a coordinated campaign of destruction. Then Carter took the stand in his own defense. Diane Fletcher stood up. "Mr. Ashworth," she said pleasantly, "let us talk about the 47 minutes. Carter held his composure for approximately 20 minutes. Then Diane asked about his text messages. Then she asked about the NDA signed by the first woman, and the second, and the third. Then she asked about the recording of his father. Carter's voice rose. He called Vivien a liar. He called Diane a pawn. He accused the judge of bias. He pointed at the gallery, and his voice broke into something that was not grief, but was something uglier beneath it. The jury watched every second. They saw the man that Vivien had lived with for 3 years, the man beneath the charity galas and the Forbes profile and the wedding tears, the man who had existed all along, waiting in the dark living room. The deliberation took 4 hours. When the jury returned, the foreperson stood. In the matter of attempted murder in the first degree, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. In the matter of aggravated assault causing grievous bodily harm, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. In the matter of witness tampering and criminal conspiracy, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. In the matter of financial crimes and obstruction of justice, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty. Guilty, 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 guilty. As the verdicts were read, Vivien closed her eyes. She thought about the kitchen floor 8 months into her marriage. She thought about the apology she gave to the man who hit her. She thought about all the times she had believed him when he told her she deserved it. "It was never my fault," she whispered. Margaret heard her. She took her daughter's hand and held it. "No," she said. "It never was, not for a single moment." The sentencing hearing was quieter than the trial. Fewer journalists, fewer spectators, just the people who needed to be present for the conclusion of something. Vivien had spent 3 weeks writing her victim impact statement. She had drafted it and discarded it and started again more times than she could count. In the end, she had kept it simple, because simple was the only form that felt honest. She stood at the podium. "Preston Ashworth tried to kill me," she read. "He beat me and degraded me and convinced me that I deserved it. He tried to erase me so completely that I would disappear and no one would ever know the truth." She looked up from the page. She looked at Carter for the first time since the trial began. He stared back at her with eyes that were calculating, even now, even here, still looking for the angle, still searching for the leverage. "But I am still here. My daughter is still here. And you have no power over either of us anymore." She folded her statement and stepped down. Judge Patricia Reynolds was 68 years old and had been on the bench for 26 years. She had presided over murders and fraud and violence of every conceivable variety. She had learned to be measured in her language and careful in her conclusions. When she looked at Carter Ashworth, her face was the face of someone who has no patience left for a certain kind of man. "Mr. Ashworth," she began, "you were given every advantage that exists. Wealth, education, family connections that open doors most people cannot see from the outside. You could have done anything with those advantages." She paused. "Instead, you chose to terrorize and abuse and nearly murder a woman who trusted you with her life. You used your money and your connections to silence the women you harmed before her, and to obstruct every attempt to hold you accountable. You believed that your wealth made you untouchable." Her voice dropped. "This court sentences you to 28 years in state prison. You will not be eligible for parole consideration for 20 years. Your assets will be liquidated in full to pay restitution to your victims. You will have no contact with your former wife or your biological daughter under any circumstances for the remainder of your natural life." She gathered her papers. "I hope the next 20 years provide you with sufficient time for reflection. Though frankly, Mr. Ashworth, the evidence suggests you may not be capable of what that would require." She brought down her gavel. "Court is adjourned." As Carter was led away in handcuffs, he turned back one last time. He was looking for Vivien, for some acknowledgement, some reaction, some sign that he still held some claim on her attention. Vivien was looking at her phone. Margaret had just sent a photograph. Grace Margaret Calloway, 14 months old, was sitting on the farmhouse kitchen floor, surrounded by the wreckage of a block tower that Robert had clearly spent considerable effort constructing. She was looking at the camera with an expression of enormous satisfaction. She was smiling, a real smile, whole face gummy, incandescent. Vivien smiled back at her phone screen. Carter Ashworth was led through a door and into a corridor and out of the part of the story that mattered. She never looked at him again. The aftermath moved through the city's power structure, the way fire moves through dry grass. The Ashworth name, which had meant privilege and access for 3 generations, became a cautionary tale told quietly in boardrooms and country clubs. Business partners issued careful statements of distance. Charitable foundations removed the Ashworth name from buildings that had carried it for decades. Gregory Holt served 3 years and emerged unemployable, a man whose professional identity had been entirely constructed around someone who no longer existed. The 3 women from Carter's past, the ones who had signed non-disclosure agreements and disappeared from their lives, filed a joint civil suit. The settlement, drawn from the liquidated Ashworth estate, allowed each of them to rebuild. One went back to school, one started a foundation of her own, one moved to another state and sent Margaret a card every Christmas. Margaret kept every one of them. Detective Walsh received a commendation from the city, though the official language about his role in the investigation was carefully vague. He framed it and hung it in his kitchen, which he felt was more honest than his office. Evelyn Doyle retired, accepted a position as honorary advisor to the Grace Foundation, and maintained that 19 years of cleaning up Carter Ashworth's messes had been, in retrospect, excellent preparation for the work. 1 year after the verdict, Vivien stood in the doorway of a converted warehouse in the warehouse district downtown. Exposed brick, second-hand furniture, donated computers, a small staff of people who had each, in some way, been where she had been. The sign above the door read, "The Grace Foundation." It provided free legal consultations, emergency housing referrals, safety planning, and courtroom advocacy for domestic violence survivors. Everything Vivien had needed and been unable to find when she was inside the prison that Carter had built around her. It was her, built from nothing, built from the specific knowledge of someone who had survived and come out the other side and decided that the other side needed to be more populated. Grace Margaret Calloway was 14 months old and had strong opinions about sweet potatoes, firmly pro, and afternoon naps, firmly against, and the structural integrity of anything her grandfather assembled on the farmhouse floor, which she considered a direct personal challenge. Robert had rebuilt the same block tower 47 times. He would rebuild it indefinitely. Sunday dinners at the Calloway farmhouse had become the organizing structure of the week. Diane came when court allowed, which was not as often as anyone wanted, but often enough. Walsh had come twice now, both times awkwardly, both times staying 3 hours longer than he had planned. Margaret fed him pot roast until the haunted look behind his eyes went somewhere quieter. One evening in the September following the verdict, Vivien sat on the farmhouse porch while Grace slept inside. The crickets were loud. The Vermont stars were the specific stars of home, the ones she had grown up under and left and found her way back to. Margaret brought 2 cups of tea and sat beside her. They were quiet for a while, in the way that people are quiet when they have been through something together that does not require words to hold. "Mom," Vivien said, "can I ask you something?" "Yes. Why did you not tell me about who you really were, what you really did before Vermont?" Margaret held her tea. "Because you were not supposed to need it," she said. "We built a quiet life. because we wanted you to have a quiet life. Safe, ordinary. We did not want our history to be the thing you carried. Vivien was quiet. It became my history anyway, she said, just differently than you expected. Margaret looked at her daughter. Yes, she said, not the way I expected at all. She took Vivien's hand. But look what you built with it. They sat together on the porch while the crickets sang and the stars turned slowly overhead, and Grace slept inside with the deep, uncomplicated sleep of a child who has never known anything but safety. 6 months after the sentencing, a letter arrived at the Grace Foundation office. It was from a correctional facility. Carter's handwriting, formal, careful language, a request for visitation rights with Grace. Vivien read it once. She took it home that evening. She lit a fire in the fireplace of her apartment, the apartment she had chosen herself and furnished herself and paid for with money she had earned herself. She put the letter in the fire and watched it become nothing. Then she picked up her daughter, held her close, walked to the window, and looked out at the city below. The past was finished. Carter Ashworth was locked away and irrelevant, and had no claim on either of their futures. Some monsters wear expensive suits. They smile for cameras, and shake hands with mayors, and attend charity galas, and make the people around them feel chosen. They hide in plain sight, protected by money and status, and the willingness of people around them to not look too carefully. But monsters can be defeated, not by other monsters, by ordinary people who refuse to look away, by doctors who document everything, by paramedics who photograph bruises before anyone can interfere, by detectives who keep working after they are taken off the case, by best friends who become prosecutors, by parents who come out of retirement for the most important assignment of their lives. Vivien did not need someone to rescue her. She needed time. Time to see clearly. Time to find her voice. Time to remember who she was before someone dedicated 3 years to convincing her she was nothing. She was never nothing. She was never weak. She was surviving. And surviving, when someone is systematically trying to destroy you, is the hardest and most powerful thing there is. She was just waiting for the right moment. The moment she stood up. The moment she chose herself. The moment she walked out of the fire, carrying her daughter into the light. Closing statement. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful entertainment with real-life lessons. Every story we create is designed not only to captivate you, but to leave you with something lasting, wisdom, hope, and the reminder that you are stronger than you know. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for being part of this community.